Welcome back. We recited at the moment we started each school day the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So who would have an objection with Florida's new law requiring all schools to have signs reading "In God We Trust" near school entrances? On the other hand, why do we need to do it at all? Some students come from different religions. Some students come from families that may not have any religion at all. So what happened to the separation of church and state? That kind of thing. Joining us for more, Bridget Ziegler, the chair of the Sarasota School Board, Susan Nylon, the president of the ACLU Sarasota chapter, and Rod Thompson of the RevolutionaryAct.com. And Bridget, we want to congratulate you on your re-election to the school board. I'm wondering, I'm wondering, so far, has the school board heard from any parents? As you saw in our story, there are some parents who obviously do have a problem with it.
So I will say I have not personally. I personally also supported this bill. I'll tell you, it's highly popular. I mean, I think 90% countrywide it's supported. So I think it really comes down to patriotism and the historical nature of it. And I understand, and really I haven't heard at any level about any concerns or worries about it from families and parents in our schools.
Susan, as I said at the outset, we do say the Pledge of Allegiance every day, and that includes one God, in it. And we have it on public buildings. Does the ACLU officially have a position on this?
The official position that we have right now is we're watching it very closely. It kind of rubs against the grain of our position of separation between church and state. This is a phrase that has only been enacted since the 1950s. It's not something that has been around since our Constitution, and I can't quite say that our founding fathers would be really happy with this. So, but at this time, with the legislation that was passed, we're just seeing where it's going and how far it's going.
Right, we're in an interesting position because the Constitution itself talks about God. On the other hand, the Supreme Court has held for a long time now about the separation of church and state. Why was this really necessary?
Well, necessary, I think it's actually a necessary good in that it's sort of a reminder of our foundations and where we came from. I also think it's important to show how reflective this is of Floridians and of the legislature that represents them. In the House, this was 97-10. This was passed during an election year. Scott signed it like that. Clearly, nobody thought there was going to be any issue with it electorally, and I don't think there will, because I think, as Bridget says, this is extremely popular, and frankly, I find that very encouraging.
I need to ask, though, how do you assess that it's extremely popular?
Well,
are there polls that have been taken?
In 2003, there was a poll, and granted that's some time ago, but I mean it was like 92%, and it was done by 4 different outlets. But still, even if you look at the legislature, who are our representatives, 97-10. I mean that bipartisan. It was actually, so I'd say it's wild. And again, going to Alan's question, have we heard about pushback on it? No. And I encourage families to give us feedback, and we haven't. So they wouldn't hold back if that was. And so I think looking at it, is there an issue here, or there isn't? And I do not believe there is.
So what I need to do is I need to send you all of the people that are reaching out to us saying we really need to take a look at it because we are upset with this.
We have to take a quick break. Our conversation on the phrase "In God We Trust" being put in every Florida public school continues. Welcome back. We are talking about the new Florida law requiring all schools to hang signs reading "In God We Trust" at the entrance. And joining us for more are Bridget Ziegler, the chair of the Sarasota School Board, Susan Nylon, the president of the ACLU Sarasota chapter, and Rod Thompson of the RevolutionaryAct.com. Rod referred to the vote in the House that helped enact this to law, 97-10, but it was sponsored by a Democrat, Representative Kimberly Daniels, a Democrat from Jacksonville who runs a Christian ministry. And she said at the time that God is the light and our schools need light in them like never before. And Bridget, I guess I got to ask you, isn't that basically an overtly religious thing? Because the truth of the matter is not every child belongs to a family that believes in God the same way that many of us do.
I think it's important to put in perspective that quote and what was happening, as we said during the break, is Representative Daniels, that was taking place right after Stoneman Douglas, but the intent of the bill was not, it was pre-Parkland. So I think if you consider the emotion that was happening at that time and what was occurring in schools, that was her personal take on it, but the actual intent of the bill was to, echo and mirror the state motto and put that and have it representative in our state buildings. So I think it's somewhat out of context.
You know, the other opposition to this is, and if you remember President Reagan's son, Ron Reagan Jr., runs an organization or is a member of it, the Freedom From Religion organization. They put out a statement basically saying that these godly postings exclude and alienate the 1 in 5 students in our public schools who do not believe in God, and they're meant to. Susan?
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense of exclusivity. There's a sense of telling a child that if you don't believe like we believe, then you don't belong. You're not a part of the group. And, you know, what does that say to allowing a parent to have the choice to bring up their child in the religion that they see fit? Why is it that the schools have to extend themselves so far?
I don't see any problem with it whatsoever, because if you flip it the other way, then you have an 80% exclusivity issue, in which either way, parents have a responsibility for teaching their children the religion of their choice at home. Having In God We Trust, which we have in our money, is the state's motto. It's on the flag. It's throughout the Capitol building where this was passed. It's everywhere out there. Having it in the schools merely reflects a part of our heritage, and for those 20%, they can easily just pass on it with their parents.
I have a great follow-up, but I have to take a quick break. We are just getting warmed up on our conversation. The phrase, "On God We Trust," being put in every Florida public school. We'll continue right after a break. Welcome back. We are talking about the new Florida law requiring all schools to hang signs reading "In God We Trust" at the entrance. And joining us for more are Bridget Ziegler, the chair of the Sarasota School Board, Susan Nylon, the president of the ACLU Sarasota chapter, and Rod Thompson of the RevolutionaryAct.com. Rod, you talked about the balance here, whether or not you are doing something that 80% of people would support and 20% might not, but isn't that also baked into our Constitution in terms of not the majority not basically overwhelming the minority?
Mm-hmm.
Well, right, sure, of course it is. So you always have that balance, but and also you don't have the minority always getting to rule over the majority. To me, this is the point of it being "In God We Trust." "In God We Trust" is religious, obviously, because you're talking about God, but it's not specific religion because it's the Judeo God, it is the Christian God, Allah is God. Most religions have a God. So the only ones that can really offend are actual atheists, which actually the numbers nationally are nowhere near 20%. That'd be pretty surprising if that were school children that are actual atheists. And so it's a very small percentage, and it's bothersome that something that's such a deep and important part of our heritage is being restricted from it for a very small percentage that apparently would be offended by it.
Susan?
So, God, there's so much to comment on. You know, a lot of our constitutional challenges start with one individual and go from there. Flag burning was one individual that we challenged and won. I want to go back to the comment of how everybody's nestling in the idea that it was a bipartisan support, 90% or whatever the numbers were. Bridget pointed out perfectly, it was right after Parkland. Everybody got caught up into the spirit of the moment. But let me remind everybody how we ended up with the Patriot Act, which most Americans don't appreciate or support right now anyway. It was because you get to a certain point where the spotlight is on you to show unity, and the one thing you want to show unity is something like that. But that doesn't mean that it's valid.
Let me ask you that about that, because we also, after Parkland passed the first gun regulation in Florida in many, many years, and Democrats often say to Republicans following these mass shootings, you don't want to talk about doing something right now, let's wait until it cools off, and then nothing gets done.
Yeah, but the legislature passed gun control and they didn't fund it. So that to me tells me they really didn't believe in the effort. They left it up to the schools to handle it, and look what happened. I mean,
well,
it's a disaster.
The rest of the gun control was removing it from the hands of 18 to 20-year-olds. That was one of the worst components of the gun control issue.
My concern is, and I know I mentioned this, is putting in perspective what was occurring, but again, the intent of the bill was not that. There was a lot of bipartisan support, and again, going back to a decade before, there was nationally, there's a lot of support for this, and I think when you think about an institution, a public institution, there is a historical nature that it represents. It's on our currency. I mean, this is something that's not just out of...
It's only on our currency for the past several decades. It hasn't been our currency for the past 100 years. It certainly wasn't in our inception. And children are raised to believe that this is from the beginning of what our founding fathers meant, and it's not
all
true.
the more reason it's
we did it
perfect
right
place
after
for it to
a
be in
war.
school. They can learn about the civics and the historical
but you guys
nature
aren't
of it.
teaching that. That's the problem. Nobody's going back and saying.
The people on the right want civics and history to be taught.
That's
We're
not what I meant.
desperate
That's
for
not
that
what
to
I
be
meant.
taught
I meant
in
the fact
schools.
that it's only been in existence for 50 years.
Obviously, this is
60
not
years.
in and of itself a partisan issue, and I'm going to read the quote that was in our story just earlier today, that public education is provided by the government and that there should be separation of church and state, and I say this as a Christian. That was a Facebook comment to Jess's story. So obviously, Bridget, this is something that I would imagine the school district is confronted all the time, especially around the holidays, in terms of whether there is any kind of showing whether it's about Christmas or Hanukkah or any other holiday that the school districts have to be extremely careful about.
So there is precedent that states that there is to be a separation between church and state, but this is not, there's the establishment clause, so this isn't indicating that the government is forcing any one religion. I mean, that's the genesis behind that. So, and it's been challenged all the way up to the Supreme Court. So for me, as a parent, as a school board member, as someone who represents this community, I believe it's a valuable element to have in our schools. I think it brings up, it doesn't mean you have to abide by it, but there's a historical nature to it, and there's a discussion that can come in. And I also believe that truly, and I think going to Representative Daniel's component or statement is, there is an element, if you talk to teachers, and there's just there's an element of respect when you're inside of a school that's kind of going by the wayside. And this is a great step forward to bringing back that element of respect in this institution, to respect the elders, to respect what you're there for. I think it's a great thing.
But I want to add, though, the Establishment Clause says you are not to establish one religion. But you've already acknowledged that at least 20% of Americans don't believe in that religion, whatever that religion is. And you're not using the title of all the religions. You're not going through all the different, Allah and so forth and so on. You're using a Christian term. So that is establishing one religion. And I want to say one more thing. Hold on. You can't recite it as there's a historical basis on this when it only goes back a few decades. It's unfair to say that this is throughout our history, because it's not.
Okay, the phrase is not throughout our history. What the phrase represents is throughout our history. It goes back to the Pilgrims. Let me finish. I let you finish. It goes back to the Pilgrims. It goes up through the Founding Fathers. It goes through the Constitutional Era and the Declaration of Independence. It goes through the Civil War. It goes up through FDR. It is integral to our history. And the attempt to constantly erase it. Religion is a part of our Constitution, as is the acceptance of God.
Let me ask you all this question. Would it make a difference in terms of your feelings about this if every school district did what Manatee County is doing and just putting up the Florida seal with the "In God We Trust" contained in it? Would that make a difference?
I mean, I like the bill that they gave flexibility again to the district, and I think that in Sarasota County, it had to be enacted by July 1st of 2018. So I know there are districts across the state that did the printout, and there was almost like, oh, that's not the respectful level that was intended. But that gave time for each respective district to choose how it is. In Sarasota County, it's in most offices. It's going to be a plaque. It's visible, but it's not. It's understated, and that's the element. This is not. I think it's being blown way out of proportion.
Exactly, which is why I wonder why it even had to become an issue. What was so important to make it happen? But I don't necessarily see it that way, and you're just assuming that everybody in that building feels that way.
No, but
and
most people. And most people see it as a positive.
But the feeling component is what worries me. How about the aspect, especially in an education institution, there is a historical nature to it that can provide an educational component, and it doesn't mean you're pushing anyone's said religion on you. And I think that's a very important distinction.
When you start off with that statement, you are pushing a certain religion, and it's not a teaching tool when nobody recognizes it. And why do it?
It's not a specific religion when Allah is another name for God.
Let me question your assumption there. You're saying that most people feel that way, but when we send out our reporter to ask parents picking up their kids, they got even the number of responses.
You're talking anecdotal there compared to compared to what Bridget was talking about, a poll, and then compared to what we have the specific numbers in the legislature of 97 to 10. The reason why
the legislature is not representational of the state.
Of course it is, because every one of them was up for election this year, going before elections. They better be representative.
I'm talking about they don't represent the view of the people.
Another quick break, and we will be back for final thoughts, maybe in a moment. And our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. So, Rod, let's start with you, because obviously it was overwhelmingly passed in the legislature, but there are voices out there, and Republican and Democrat, who are a little bit uncomfortable with this.
Sure, and there's always going to be people who, on any issue out there, there's always going to be some people, right? Because we're a huge and a divided and a very diverse sort of state. So there's always going to be that. I just want to say that one of the most powerful things I found in this was the unity of when Representative Daniels was speaking on the floor of the House in the final week or so of the legislative session in March. And she was making her final pitch for this bill. She's at the back of the floor there, on the floor of the House. She starts speaking. She's making her pitch one by one. Republican lawmakers, who it turns out were all white and mostly all male, were standing behind her in solidarity with her. And then after that, there's a standing ovation on the House floor for her speech for the bill throughout the House floor. When I'm watching it and they pan back, I couldn't see anybody that wasn't. That was a huge moment of unity. And yes, it had to do with Parkland, but I think it also had to do to some degree with the content of the bill.
Susan?
There's just not enough time in this show for me to go over everything, but you guys keep focusing on the same issue, and I don't think it's a representation of the state. You're referring on polls that existed in 2003. You're talking about a moment that happened after Parkland, and everybody wanted to show unity for it. But that doesn't mean it represents everyone. And when I say that we don't have a representational Congress in our state, it just means that they focus on one sector of the population, and that's who they represent. They don't represent the entire state. There's a lot of people that feel disenfranchised, and just because they're not banging on your door doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I take issue with the fact that you guys are willing to ignore the 20% or the 1 out of every 5 children who may feel incredibly uncomfortable with that statement.
No, I think as a school board member, and something that Rod hit on, we have a very diverse population, and that's something that I take very seriously. But something that I do hear, and foundationally, and I think Parkland chipped right into the core of that, is there is something lacking. There's something missing in our younger generation, and it also starts in schools. And if this is the step forward, and I'm not going to infringe upon anyone's right of their religious rights, but I think this is a good step. It gives me, I think it's a good step forward, and I think that these are anecdotal stories that support the value of this bill. We
have to leave it there, and I want to thank you all very much. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers had to say about last night's show on the 1 year since Sarasota teenager Jabez Spann went missing. There have been community searches. The people have worked tirelessly to try to find out what happened to Jabez Spann. The family pleading with everyone with information to come forward, and the reward money leading to finding Spann is up to $50,000. We went to Facebook for your thoughts, and Lisa says, they are right. People know something about this. Please come forward for his mother's sake. Casey says the community is absolutely not doing enough because the people in the community who have known has said nothing. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast. We want to thank our guests for being here tonight. Bridget Ziegler, the chair of the Sarasota School Board, Susan Nylon, the president of the ACLU Sarasota chapter, and Rod Thompson of the RevolutionaryAct.com.